Many years ago, in a beautiful town of Iran, there lived a man named Obaseki. Obaseki was not like most men, unlike other men his age, who worked as carpenter and some as bricklayers and others as well. Obaseki sold food on the streets. He was a food venderer. He had a local restaurant, but we fondly refer to as Mama, where he sold all types of delicious delicacies on the streets of Iran. Obaseki was very popular, and despite the fact that he was a man, he had lots and lots of customers every blessed day, and this made his neighbors Aisha and Iberia, who sold food on the streets with him, very jealous. They wondered how a man would be selling food and would have a lot of people standing on the queue to buy his food. They, who were women, only had very few persons patronizing them and wonder what his secret was. Iberia had sent one of her friends to secretly go and buy food just so she could eat it and see what was so fantastic about the food. But she realized that there was nothing peculiar about his food. As a matter of fact, her own food was more delicious than his food. Iberia did not know what to do. Her business was slowly running down because of a basis restaurant, and she could not afford for that to happen because she had too many mouths to feed and take care of. So one day, Iberia came up with a plan. She invited her niece, who lived in a neighboring state, to come over to her place. She wanted her to come over and get a job at Obaseki's restaurant so she could serve as a spy and tell her what Obaseki was doing differently, what his secret was, so that she could apply it in her own business before he completely ruins her. Meanwhile, Obaseki was very happy because he was very successful there. It was never a dull moment in his restaurant. Everyone wanted to buy food from him, the rich and the poor. The rich would pack their cars and with their expensive clothes be struggling for a plate of food at his restaurant, despite the fact there were other better places where they could eat. But Obaseki was very happy. He was married and had 3 beautiful wives, but his wives were never allowed to come to his shop. He had forbid them, saying,
"No account should you ever come to my restaurant during the day, and on no account should you eat the food that I sell at my restaurant, and lastly, on no account should you reveal any of the things that I have told you to anyone. That is for your own good, though a word is enough for the wise."
His wives wondered why their husband would not allow them to eat the food that they sold, or at least come out to assist him because of the crowd that he pulled. Also, they did not really bother so much about it. After all, Obaseki provided very well for them, but Fairshad, on the other hand, was worried her husband Obaseki. He had changed after the death of their only child Oi. They had not always been this wealthy, and she was once Ower's only wife, and her husband Obaseki had not always owned the local restaurant. As a matter of the fact, he had once been a bus driver and had once been very poor. Their only child of Oi was very sick, and they were too poor to pay for good medical care, even though Obaseki had sold everything that he had, including his bus, to save his son. But his son Oi had still died. After the death of Oi, Obaseki had a 360-degree change. Oi's death had affected him so badly, as he shared a very great bond with Oi, as he was their only child. Obaseki locked himself indoors for days, weeping and crying. Patient was very worried, and after some days, Obaseki traveled to his hometown, Asia, and when he came back, that was when he opened this restaurant, and in a matter of just 3 months, his restaurant had exploded. He was now the #1 food vendor in the whole of Iran, for they saw this very disturbing because not only did a husband not know how to cook ordinary white rice, to talk of cooking food to sell also. Her husband, who had always preached against polygamy, had gone ahead to take 2 more wives. Fashed had tried to speak to her husband severally, but he never gave her any listening ears. Something had died inside of him. Obaseki, on the other hand, was very happy. He was now very wealthy and his business was doing very well. Also, he was not the one that did the actual cooking, but after his staff was done cooking, he would send them all out of the front of the shop to go and pray for sales. And then he will go inside to where the food was and put his secret sauce before the food was served public. So when people passed his shop in the morning and saw his staff praying, they all assumed that it was because he was prayerful that his shop was booming, unknown to them that he had a secret ingredient which nobody knew about it. Meanwhile, Iberia's niece Fomi had come all the way to Iran from Sango just to come and spy on Obaseki. Fomi was a very beautiful young lady and always caught the attention of men. So when she arrived Iran, her auntie had already rented a 1-room apartment for her where she would be living so that she doesn't blow her cover. Because if she was going to walk from Iberia's house sooner or later, Obaseki was going to find out that she had been sent to spy on him and would sack her. So Fomi went and applied for a job at Obaseki's local restaurant, and she got the job. So every day, Fomi went to work and she tried to poke her nose into what was happening. She was always asking questions. That was when she began to notice that also her boss did not participate in cooking the food, and neither did he come early yet, even though a lot of customers were waiting for him and the food was ready. Nobody did not sell food to anybody until he came, and each time he came, he would first come in with a bag and then go straight into the kitchen where the food was, and then shut the door behind him, and then he would pour a white substance that looked like cream into all different pots of food so that everything is well dissolved before his staff could now come and start sharing the food. Fomi informed her auntie all that she saw. She had found out.
You need to dig deeper. You need to find out what he does with that food behind closed doors. I am sure he does something to his food that makes him sell like crazy.
Iberia said, looking very determined. Meanwhile, Fashed continued to wonder why her husband has been behaving strangely since the death of their son. He had a room where nobody was allowed to enter. She had tried severally to find out what was in that room, but Obaseki was very careful with the key. He always slept with the key to that, and so it was impossible for everyone to have access to the room. So Fashed decided that she was going to find out what was in that room. So she came up with a plan. One day, her husband had entered the secret room as usual. Then Fashed came out screaming, "Fire! Fire! The house is burning! Fire!" Obaseki ran out the room very quickly, and as soon as he ran out the door, Fashed sneaked into the room, and to her disappointment, the room looked as normal as any other room in the house. She was very disappointed, but at the same time relieved. She had very worse of her husband's thinking. that he was doing ritual money, and so she had expected to see about 2 or 3 dead bodies in the room or blood all over the floor. But when she was about to leave the room, her eyes caught a stack of bottles. She recognized the bottles. They were the same time that her husband brought back from work every blessed day, and he washed them himself too. He never allowed any of his wife touch the bottles. Faye should wonder what was in the bottle that was so important that her husband would lock them into the room that no one was allowed access to. She opened one of the bottles, and to her shock, it was her husband's manly fluid. Why is Obaseki bottling his fluid? What could he be doing with his manly fluid? Why did he take it to the restaurant every single day? She wondered as she hurried out of the room. She knew that he would return soon. When he finds out that the fire was a false alarm, Faishat pondered about what her husband could be doing with his fluid. Is that why none of his wives have ever gotten pregnant for him yet? And he's not bothered. He doesn't even threaten any of them about giving him children. Meanwhile, Fomi had also set her own plan in motion to find out what Obaseki did behind closed doors with the food when he was all alone. So one day, when all Obaseki's staff had come into the work as usual and were done cooking, and they just simply waiting for their boss to come in and inspect the food before they could start serve. Despite the crowd waiting for the food, Fomi sneaked into the room where the food was, and she inside one of the cupboards, waiting patiently for Obaseki to come in. A few minutes later, Obaseki walked into the room as usual, thinking he was all alone. He opened a small bottle and poured out what looked like a creamish whitish substance into the pot of food, and immediately closed the pots. She saw it. She was shocked and screaming immediately as she came out of her hiding. Obaseki was very shocked to see her. Then he shouted, "What are you doing here?" Looking very afraid, but Fomi did not pay him any attention. Instead, she kept on screaming,
Everybody come and see! Oh, this man is using what to sell his food! Oh, come and see!
Fomi screaming. In a matter of seconds, everyone, his employees, his customers who had come to buy food, had rushed into the room. They were all shocked to see Obaseki frozen and carrying a small bottle that contained what looked like the creamish whitish substance. And then Fomi stopped shouting and said,
I noticed the usual crowd that gathers at a restaurant every day. I also noticed that before we allowed to sell the food to customers, that my boss Obaseki will have to come into the store where the food is kept and shut the door and stay alone with the food. I always wondered what he was doing with the food. So I decided to investigate, because I also noticed that he does not eat the food that he sells. I hid inside the cabinet only for me to find him bringing out a bottle from his bag and then pouring it into the food. And so I began to scream.
On the other hand, Obaseki shouted,
Liars! Lie that she's lying! She's only trying to tarnish my name and ruin my business.
Obaseki replied, looking very scared. Chuki, one of his customers, asked,
So what is inside that bottle?
Nothing! No, nothing! It is just my secret source. It is nothing, as a matter of fact. It is simply milk mixed with some herbs and spices.
If it is milk mixed with some herbs and spices, then can you at least take a sip? After all, you are putting it in the food that you sell to us?
he refusing to drink it, and by this time a lot of people had gathered around. They all started in shock And as they saw that Obaseki refused to drink the content of the bottle, one of his customers snatched the bottle from him and then perceived it and immediately screamed and then passed it around to another customer who also perceived it and then said,
Ha ha ha, Dad, is this what I think? This smells like a man's fluid.
As soon as the words had gone out of his mouth, they immediately grabbed Obaseki and started beating him and said, "Why will you be giving us food that you cooked with your fluid? Do you know how disgusting that is? Why did you do it?" They began to beat the hell out of Obaseki. When saw that the beating was becoming worse and many people had joined hands in beating him, and by this time news has reached his wives at home. They had heard all that was happening and had rushed to the restaurant to see for themselves. Obaseki was screaming and he started saying,
I will confess. I will confess that. Please stop beating me. Please forgive me. I will confess.
And so they stopped beating him, so they could hear what he had to say. And then Obaseki, who was already encouraged, started talking and said,
It all started when my son O died. Many of you know how I loved O so much. I came to many of you to beg for money to please assist me with money, so that I could pay my son's hospital bills, so that he would not die. But many of you did not help me, and my son ended up dead. I was shattered and very heartbroken, and that was when I knew that I never wanted to be poor again in my life. And I also wanted to deal with you people, the people of IRAGUN, those who abandoned me in my time of need. So I met a man, Bab Jessa, and told him what I wanted. And after making some sacrifices, he told me to use my fluid to cook for you. That way it will not only give me wealth, but that as many people that eat my food will come down with one terminal illness or the other and die in the future. It's only a matter of time.
Obaseki replied, looking very repentant.
Ah! This man has killed me. Oh! Do you know that I eat this man's food every blessed day?
A customer screamed.
My children take his food to school every day.
Ah! This man is wicked though. Oh! So because you asked some people for money when your son was sick and they did not give you and your son ended up dying, does that mean that you would wipe out a whole community? Is there a single person in this town that has not eaten your food, so everyone should die because your son died? You will join your son today.
And so he picked up stones and began to stone to Obaseki. Immediately his wife saw what was happening. They sneaked out and escaped because they knew that after they were done with Obaseki that they would face them to them, and they ran away for their dear lives. A few minutes later, Obaseki gave up the ghost. He laid on the floor, lifeless. And then the customers began to look for his wives, but they could not find any one of them. So they went ahead and burned down the restaurant, and then proceeded to his house, which was one of the finest houses in that area, and also bent it to the ground. Nobody in that community ever bought food from the restaurants again, to even Ibeshia, who had brought her niece Fomi to spy on Obaseki, was also affected because no one bought food from her either. So she had no choices than to close down her restaurant. She began to regret why she had gone so far as to bring her niece to spy on Obaseki's business. Now it had also affected her as people no longer bought food, and until this day there is no food seller in the whole of IRAGUN community. Because of Obaseki's, no other person has tried to open a restaurant as the people of IRAGUN would not buy, because the people of IRAGUN had to go to great lengths and offer sacrifices to cleanse their lands, so that there live be no outbreak of disease on their lands and their lives will be spread. Hi friends, it's me again. Thank you so much for watching my story to the end. I like to hear your thoughts on this one. So, what do you think about Obaseki? Do you think that he deserved to die, considering that he's coming from a place of trauma? He was traumatized by the death of his son and acted in response to that trauma. And also, what do you think of Ibeshria? Do you think it serves her right that her shop was finally closed and she had no business anymore? Please share your thoughts with me in the comment section. I would like to hear them, and please support this channel by subscribing it and liking my videos and sharing with your loved ones. So until I come your way again with more interesting stories, bye.